Hello and welcome to How to Get Over It with myself, Candice Mama, and my good friend Justin Cohen. Today we're discussing how to get over PTSD. This is a big one, Jess. What is PTSD?
So, PTSD is post-traumatic stress disorder. Post-traumatic stress disorder, and it usually comes after a life-threatening event. So it could be a rape, an assault. It could be that you were just witness to a rape and assault. It could be a car accident, a natural disaster like an earthquake. It could also be a life-threatening illness, being in ICU, feeling that you came close to death. So it is really the symptoms of anxiety that arise after a traumatic event. But Kat, what's really important is that a lot of people think that if you've had a trauma in your life, you are going to get PTSD, right? And that's not true. That is not true at all. So only 20% of people who have a traumatic event will actually get PTSD. So almost everyone is going to be anxious, right? They're going to be afraid. They're going to be fearful in the moment. But remember, there's a critical distinction between fear and anxiety, right? So fear is the feelings of nervousness that we feel in response to a real threat, right? So anybody who is in a life-threatening situation, a car accident, a rape, an assault, is going to experience fear, right? And that's natural. That is a very resourceful emotion, because what the fear does is it raises adrenaline and cortisol. It gets the blood into the muscles so that you can fight or flight, right? So that you can deal with this in the moment, right? So fear is a good thing. It's an adaptive response to a direct threat, right? So within the trauma, it would be appropriate to have a fear response. However, for about 20% of people, they are going to continue to have many of those same sensations of fear after the event when there is no longer a threat, right? So remember, fear is a response to a real threat. Anxiety is a response to a perceived threat. So PTSD is when we continue to have this response, even when the direct threat is no longer there. Yeah. Now, what's interesting about PTSD is that not only is it only about a fifth of people who have a trauma will have PTSD, it is a little bit higher with things like a rape. Rape could be as high as 40 to 50%. So it's usually higher when there is a social factor, right? So something like a rape or an assault or a murder, when that interpersonal threat actually increases the chances of PTSD. Still, less than half are going to actually have PTSD. But the thing about it is that it may take a few days, weeks, months, or even years to have PTSD symptoms, right? So it doesn't necessarily come straight after the event. It's something that could be delayed. And that might be because, and this was one of the powerful insights of Freud's, was that sometimes with trauma, we can repress those feelings of fear as a way to deal with our lives, right? Because it's so overwhelming, the brain figures, let's just, repress this so that you can get on with your life. And then at a time, and it could be triggered by something else that is similar, or even just a memory, at a later time, those symptoms actually can then re-arise.
Wow. So how do you know you have it, Jess? If it comes up, if it could come up years later?
So again, if you've just had a traumatic event, you are going to have many of the symptoms of PTSD, but that would be natural, right? There's nothing that is unsurprising. However, if those symptoms, and we're talking about the feelings of anxiety, terror, flashbacks to the event, dreams, nightmares, right? Persistent nightmares about the event. If that persists for a month afterwards, right? Or arises a month or even a year later, then it's PTSD, right? So if you're having it for a few weeks afterwards, that's not considered a major issue. It's actually then if it persists thereafter, right? So for instance, usually the PTSD will be related to that traumatic event. So for instance, somebody who had a car accident might continue to experience anxiety about getting into a car, driving in a car, right? And if that happens and that remains past a month after that event, then that looks like PTSD, right? And you can understand why the brain is doing this. And by the way, this is very important to understand. You know, a lot of the anxiety conditions that we deal with in Transcend and that we're going to deal with through these master classes, you're not broken, right, if you have PTSD. All that's happened here is that your brain has overcompensated. Yeah, it's actually a very natural approach, right? It's actually a very natural response. See, the brain figures, look, if something bad happened in a car, right, and you nearly died, we need to prevent you from repeating that experience. So therefore, whenever you get near a car, we're going to get the alarm bells going saying, don't go there, right? Because remember, something bad happened there once, yeah? And so you can understand the brain really cares about you. It wants you to survive, right? As I always say, the brain is far more interested in survival than happiness, right? It doesn't really mind as much whether you're happy as much as that you are okay, right? That you're physically okay. So there's this overcompensation. Remember, the brain has what I call hyperreactive threat detection system, right? The brain is fundamentally concerned about protecting you against threats. So if you actually have a real threat, right, you have a real trauma, the brain's going to say, whoa, whatever happened there, we want to make sure that never happens again. Yeah. Now, you can see what could happen here with a rape, right? So if you're raped by a man or you're in an abusive relationship, by the way, it may not be a rape. There are many women who are in abusive relationships. They are being abused. They are being tortured emotionally, physically, day after day. Yeah. And so we're not talking about a single traumatic event, right? They're having this almost continual trauma. Now, when they finally leave that person, yeah, the brain goes, whoa, the brain may go, not only is that man a bad man that you need to avoid, right? But all men, right, are bad, and you need to avoid all men, yeah? And so this is, the brain generalizes, right? Remember, the brain fundamentally cares about your physical well-being. So it figures, hey, if a man did that thing, other men could do the same thing, therefore avoid all men, yeah? Had a bad experience in a car, therefore avoid all cars. Had a bumpy flight, therefore avoid all airplanes, yeah? So this is the way that we learn fear, right? We actually learn fear. And part of that learning process is to generalize. You recall we've spoken about that seminal study in psychology that was done in the 1920s by the behaviorist John Watson to prove how fear is learned, right? It was a little boy called Little Albert, and Little Albert had this little rat that a very cute little rat, more like a hamster than a rat, and he loved this little rat, and they were great buddies, and it would make him smile. Then Watson starts to smash an iron bar against the pan behind Little Albert's head, right? Every time he's playing with the rat, Little Albert starts to cry, tries to crawl away, and Watson does this on a number of occasions and then stops doing it, right? Now, even though the noise has stopped, Little Albert still, in the presence of the rat, starts to cry and crawl away, right? So he's learned to feel that. He didn't feel the rat before, right? But that noise, pairing that noise, we call this classical condition, pairing that horrible noise, yeah, with the rat, which previously he was not scared of, now he has this fear. And as long as he tries to avoid the rat, now this is critical, right? This is how we maintain the learning. As long as he tries to avoid the rat, he's telling his brain, this is bad, this is dangerous. His brain makes him feel better as he avoids it, yeah? But what that means is that whenever he's in the presence of the rat, he's going to get scared again, yeah? Now, what's interesting about this study, is that Watson noticed, even back then, afterwards, little Albert would cry and try to crawl away from a Father Christmas mask, right? Fluffy, looks like a rat, yeah. And a ball of wool, a ball of white wool. And so what he had done is he had generalized anything that looks like that white rat, I must avoid, right? And so you can see exactly what happens here in our lives, yeah? And you even hear this, you know, one of the things I find so absurd, you'll hear, sadly, women saying about men, you'll hear men saying about women, you know, women are this, you know, they all women are, you know, crazy, or, you know, all men are bastards, or all, well, no, actually, that guy you were with perhaps was, and that girl that you were with perhaps was, but we're generalizing, and the brain does this, right? It does this because, remember, the brain overestimates threat. So it says, if one thing, one place was threatening, now I need to avoid it. But as we know, if we're really looking for a simple way to understand anxiety, right? Anxiety is learned through avoidance, yeah? Because as long as I stay away, my brain's going to say that is threatening. Now, again, if it's a hot stove, that's a good thing because that's a real threat. But if it is actually just motor cars or men, of course, some men, some motor cars are dangerous, right? There's some men, you know, who are absolutely dangerous. I'm not saying that means, oh, well, you just had one bad experience with men, now all other men are fine. No, obviously we need to have our threat awareness out there. But if we're saying all, then clearly we're making a mistake here, right? So this is what happens with PTSD, is that the brain goes, one bad thing happened here, we got to make sure that that never happens again. And so we're going to raise the alarm constantly to prevent you from exposing yourself, yeah, to that event again.
And I love how you use the different analogies, because I think whenever I've heard of PTSD, it's related to, you know, people come back from wars or people who experience really huge traumatic events. So like one singular event. I think the way you broke it down in terms of you can experience PTSD if you've been in a long-term abusive relationship, because it's a consistent, right? It's consistently.
Absolutely. And of course, it could happen on a single incident within a relationship, right? So you could get PTSD just, you know, because of that one event that happened with that particular person. So it really, you know, it really depends on the situation. Again, of course, you're absolutely right. In fact, PTSD really came about in the war wounded who came back, you know, from various wars. Initially, it was called shell shock, right? And some of these men who had been fighting war would come back and they would have all the symptoms of PTSD, the nightmares, the flashbacks, the heart palpitations, the sudden flashes of memory, that jitteriness, right? Being constantly on edge, something bad's going to happen. Think about what's your brain doing. Your brain's bringing you on edge because your brain went, oh my gosh, you nearly died. Okay, you nearly died. So we need to keep you in a high alarm state here, right? So what's really happening is for somebody with PTSD who's having these symptoms on an almost regular daily basis, is their threat detection, right? What I call our overreactive threat detection system, which we all have. But for people with PTSD, that comes to the fore. So they're in this almost constant adrenalized state, right? Being on the ready for something bad that's going to happen. Yeah, that's kind of where they're. This is what makes this really so painful, because nothing out there can really make it go away, right? Because it's no longer coming from out there. Yeah, you might have already left the abusive guy. You're out the war. The disaster's over, but it's not over in your head, right? And it keeps you in this, you know, this state of almost constant fear, right? And it's really prevalent. Yeah, I mean, this is something really prevalent, and this is really something, once again, like all anxiety disorders, that we can get over.
Oh, and that actually leads me to the question, Jess, how do we get over it? Because it seems like such a big thing to grasp. So how do we have the tools and techniques to get over PTSD?
So really we use the same transcender principles as we do with all the anxiety disorders, right? So there are many different kinds of anxiety: OCD, PTSD, general anxiety disorder, intrusive thoughts. By the way, PTSD, there may well be a lot of intrusive thoughts as well, right? Intrusive thoughts of the event. But as I always say, anxiety is like snow. There might be 50 different kinds, but what melts one usually melts them all. Okay, let's just take a moment to see what people often want to do after a disaster. Now, in the United States, where there's obviously a lot of research on PTSD, partly because there have been many wars. This goes back to Vietnam. There's a very big academic research body on this. And of course, there's quite a lot of trauma there as well. I'm not saying there isn't trauma all over the world, but particularly there's been a lot of focus on killings, on school killings. Now, what tends to happen when a shooter goes in and kills kids and teachers in a school, afterwards, for what they discovered is that the teachers would cordon off the place where these murders took place and prevent the kids from going there, right? And that would just happen sort of indefinitely. So you could have months, or in some cases was even over a year where nobody, right? So nobody who was there would then ever go back. We're like, no, we have to protect the kids. They must never go back to that classroom, say, where that murder took place. Yeah. And this kind of sounds sensible in a way, right? Oh my gosh, something bad happened. We want to protect our children. We must make sure they never go back. But of course, what happens then if that area where this happened is something that we avoid? Remember, avoidance trains the brain to fear. As long as I'm not going there, it's bad, it's dangerous, right? Something terrible can happen. So actually, and obviously this takes place after the police have done their work, obviously after the place is safe. I mean, we're not suggesting that you do this immediately, right, afterwards, but as quickly as possible. You actually want to get the kids, the teachers back into that classroom. You actually want to get them back there. Now that's going to be tough, right? For some of them, particularly those who were there at the time, it's going to be tough. It's going to raise their anxiety, right? This is why people don't want to do this, because they go, oh my gosh, you can see they're scared, get them away, get them away. No, get them there gently, right? So obviously you don't shove them in there, right? You talk to them, you tell them what you're doing, you might even give them this rationale. But in a gradual way, you ultimately want to get them back there so that they can go, well, okay, something bad did happen here, but that's over, right? That's in the past. Yeah. Nothing bad is happening anymore. There's no more threat here. The threat is over. Remember, the brain's going, there's still threat, there's still threat, there's still threat. Now you've got to train your brain who loves you, who wants the best for you, and you're going to say, brain, it's okay, dude. We're okay here. Come check it out. We're going to be okay. Come. I know it's scary. Come here. Come into the space. Can you see? We're okay here. Okay. Because here's the thing, Ken, avoidance trains the brain to fear. Essentially exposure going into whatever it is, as long as it isn't intrinsically threatening, that's how we teach. That's how we unlearn anxiety, right? We learn anxiety through avoidance. We unlearn anxiety through exposure. Yeah? So you can see how this could apply to any form of PTSD, right? If somebody's been raped, and they want to avoid men, right? You want to gradually reconnect them with men, right? Good men. You don't do that sort of thing, okay? Obviously. So again, that's not necessarily going to happen immediately. You're not going to say, okay, great, you need to go out on 6 dates next week. No, but and this is perhaps what we should talk a little bit about, because in the Transcender method, as you know, there's 3 main strategies for getting over anxiety of any kind. 3 main strategies, right? And the first is action. It's what we do. So much therapy is about what's going on in our heads and our integration and talking and thinking. And yes, there is some place for that. But one of the most powerful things that you can do is actually act, right? So what's happened is the anxiety has taken root through avoiding, right? And now we actually want to expose, right? We don't want to run away. We want to run to. Now, we do this with 5 steps. This is the 5-step process in the Transcender method. So we do it gradually, right? So let's take the example of, say, somebody who has been sexually assaulted, right, and is avoiding men. What you might do initially is you might at first just imagine yourself, right, communicating with a man, yeah? And then ultimately you would actually meet a man. Now, obviously, I'm going to say this again. Obviously, we're talking about somebody who, I know there's no guarantees in life. And this is one of the things that anxiety thrives on, because it says, well, I know this guy is vouched for by my friend but what if he is, right? And nobody can say that he's not, right? And this is the thing. This is what makes anxiety so tough, is that there's always the possibility, right? However, if you take all the precautions, make sure this guy is vouched for, maybe you go see him with somebody else as well, right? So you take all those precautions initially, right? That would be the next step of even just imagining. So even just imagine exposure is the first step, then the actual exposure. Then you want to make it a habit, right? So if you meet, this guy and he's a really cool guy, but you only do it once and you're, okay, yeah, no, I don't like that, I'm not doing it again, that's not going to help, right? You actually need to do it regularly, on a regular basis, right? So that the brain starts to learn, okay, not all guys, do that sort of thing. You want to remain in the situation, right? So actually stay there. If you just go and say, met the guy and then ran away, then you tell your brain, no, there's a danger, there's a threat here, right? So you actually want to stay there long enough for your anxiety actually come down a bit, right? So if you go in and you can actually measure your anxiety, by the way, this applies to any exposure. And I'm using an example here that's specifically rape related, but it could be a motor car, right? So then you would say, okay, I'm going to go sit in the motor car. I'm not going to drive it. I'm just going to sit there, right? Your heart rate's going to go up. Now, what you want to do is you want to stay there until your heart rate drops a little bit. So you can actually measure your anxiety on a scale of 0 to 10, 10 being the worst, 0 being the least. And you can say, okay, I'm getting in the car. Ooh, my anxiety's a 9. Okay, stay there until it drops to a 7. Okay, that's very important, because if it goes to 10 and you leave, what are you doing? Telling your brain, oh my gosh, this is actually bad. This is dangerous, right? But if you get in at an 8, it drops to a 7, your brain goes, oh, okay, still wasn't great, but actually things didn't get worse. They got better. You with me? So you want to remain in that situation. You want to avoid defenses, okay? So, if you were trying to get over the fear of flying, you don't want to drink a bottle of whiskey before you go on, for a couple of reasons. It might not be such a good idea when you're on the plane and you're drunk. But actually, importantly, you don't want to insulate yourself from the anxiety. You see, a lot of people think, no, I've got to insulate. I've got to take a Xanax, a benzodiazepine, which is one of the most common treatments for anxiety. It's not a good idea. It's almost as bad as drinking. Research tells us benzos and alcohol not good, okay? Because what they do is they're very addictive. They do make you feel better, but then there's a rebound effect, right? As you come off them, you feel worse. So you actually want to go into that situation, right? Just cut out your defenses, right? Just be there, experience those thoughts and sensations, let them be, and they will gradually start to quieten down on their own, right? You can do it, okay? You've got to metaphorically hold your hand, and it's going to get better, yeah? And then the 5th step is, don't be disappointed if the anxiety doesn't go away immediately, right? So this is not about exposure isn't about going in and not feeling anxiety. It's about going in and feeling the fear and doing it anyway, right? And then over time, your brain will realize, because you're there, you haven't avoided, nothing bad happened, the trauma didn't happen again, the brain learns, right? It's okay. In effect, the brain unlearns that anxiety as long as you stay in the situation. Yeah? And I'm going to say it again, obviously, as long as that situation is not actually threatening. Yeah. So that's the first strategy that we use to overcome anxiety, right? It's the action. It's about going in a gradual way. It can take a good few weeks, to get there. So it's like going to gym, right? You don't just suddenly get the muscles you want, right? We're talking about reprogramming our brain, rewiring our brain. We actually see shifts in the brain, new neurons, connections between neurons. So think of the brain like a muscle. It takes time. And by the way, something else can happen. You can do this and then still have a relapse, have a flashback, think, hey, oh, I'm fine now, in the car or on the airplane or in that particular space where that trauma happened. And then suddenly you feel that anxiety again. That's okay, right? Just remember, it's a bit like exposure is learning. It's learning, that's what it is. And you know that even when you learn for an exam, you learned, but then sometimes you can forget what you learned, right? And you just got to go back and you got to relearn, okay? So people often get freaked out with relapses. And, oh, it hasn't worked because I've had this relapse. Relapse is natural. It's okay, right? It's just your brain that's taking time to learn and sometimes forgetting. And we just got to, hold our hand and guide ourselves there, okay? So that really is essential when it comes to overcoming PTSD, right? We've got to go back to that place, right? Assuming, when I say back to that place, obviously, if you were assaulted in a dangerous place, you don't need to go back to that place, right? But if it means that because I was assaulted in that place while I was walking alone, now I don't want to walk alone, right? No, you've got to learn to walk alone because not all places are dangerous like that place. So you've got to be, remember, your brain's generalizing. Say, when I walked alone, something bad happened, I never want to walk alone again, yeah? So no, you're not going back to that place, but you need to expose yourself to other situations that are safe, that are similar to that your brain has begun to generalize. So you need to find safe places to walk alone. Again, starting with imagining, then perhaps going with someone, right? And then over time, finally going on your own.
Wow. Now, and Joss, I know you have acronyms that you use in order people to remember this. Would you share some of those with us, please?
Yeah. Sure, Ken. So the first is action. Okay, that's our first strategy. We call this the art of life. So there's 3 strategies. Number 1 is action. Number 2 is reinterpretation. So, Ken, if we're really looking for a sustaining cause of anxiety, it's a particular kind of overthinking called worrying. And by the way, if we're looking for a particular sustaining cause for depression, it's a particular kind of overthinking called rumination. That's when you think about negative events in the past, going round and round, looking for their causes and consequences. And there's another kind of overthinking that I call analysis, right? Where you're just analyzing. But each one of these, and there's a neat little acronym, WAR, worrying, analysis, rumination, is a form of overthinking, right? So remember that fear is a response to real threats, anxiety a response to perceived threat. What maintains threat perception is thinking, right? So as long as you're thinking, oh my gosh, all men are dangerous, bad, abusive, right? You're going to maintain this anxiety, right? So as long as you're thinking, cars are dangerous, people can die, I could die, I need to avoid, right? You are maintaining your perception of this threat, yeah? We can even have a kind of overthinking about thinking. So let's say somebody who has gone to war, and that war's over, right? Because a lot of people in war, they know they're not going back there, but their thinking might be about their symptoms of PTSD, right? So they might be overthinking about, oh my gosh, I'm constantly having flashbacks and nightmares, and I will constantly have flashbacks and nightmares, right? So it's kind of like fear of fear, right? A lot of anxiety is actually the fear of fear. So I will keep on having it. When will it ever stop? It'll never stop, and I'm going crazy, and I'm stuck in my mind, right? So it's all that sort of thinking about thinking, yeah? Thinking about the actual symptoms of anxiety itself, right? This is a very, very big form of anxiety, right? Franklin D. Roosevelt said, interestingly, during the Great Depression, 1933, and his inauguration, there's nothing to fear but fear itself. And the truth is, that's a lot of what anxiety is. It's actually the fear of the symptoms of anxiety, right? Fear of the intrusive thoughts, a fear of the nightmare that I might have tomorrow, right? So while, some PTSD will be, the overthinking will be about the trauma itself, a lot of it will actually be about the symptoms of the PTSD, right? So Ken, this kind of overthinking, right, is the research shows us is very, very clearly connected to emotional distress, not just anxiety, but depression as well. Now, with the second strategy for emotional and life transformation and transcendent, reinterpretation, we start to become aware of these thoughts, right? This is very important because most people aren't even aware of their thoughts. They're just identified with their thoughts. They just assume their thoughts are reality. They believe their thoughts, right? If I have a thought, all men are bad, it must be true. All men are bad, right? So I have a thought, all women are bad, it must be true. All women are bad. I have a thought, all cars, it must be true, right? So we believe our thoughts. But of course, our thoughts, particularly when it comes to anxiety, think of your thoughts like a security guard. It's a security guard that is keeping you on hyper alert, right, of the bad things that are going to happen. Right? A lot of these thoughts are what ifs, but what if I get in the car and then, what if I go on the date but what if, right? And you can always come up with what ifs, right? And you can't actually dispute them because that what ifs are always possible. Anything is possible, right? Anything is possible. So those what ifs are always possible. The problem with the what ifs, which are classic overthinking of worrying, is that keeps you scared, right? As long as you are thinking about something bad that is going to happen, as long as you are thinking about something bad that did happen, you are going to be anxious, right? You're going to be anxious. So with reinterpretation, we start to take note of these thoughts and just question them a little bit, right? Question them a little bit. So we might say, if we have a thought that says, yeah, but what if that happens again? You might say, well, the chances are good that it won't happen again because, I'm actually not with that same person, or that, that I'm no longer walking in the dangerous area, or, this person has been vouched for, and, I've checked in and everybody has vouched for this guy and said that he's not a violent or abusive person. Yeah. And then you might even have your mind saying, yeah, but how do you know it still won't happen? You're going to say, well, okay, that's a risk I'm willing to take, right? So you've even got to be honest with yourself and know that there's no 100%, but I'd rather live my life with a little bit of risk than really not live a life, right? With no risk, right? So you might just talk yourself through that, right? With reinterpretation, and just start to, just check your thoughts and question them a little bit, right? Just question, hold on, is that really true? Is that really likely to happen? Understanding that the hyperactive threat detection system is a great catastrophizer, right? It paints the worst, most bleak possible picture, right? Remember, the brain wants to overestimate threat because it cares about your survival, right? The brain figures, underestimate the threat, you could die, right? Overestimate a threat, yeah, so what? You overestimated a threat. You get to live another day. I don't care if you're a little bit anxious, yeah? So that's what the brain does. Right? The brain evolved to deal with a very different environment, the caveman environment of our ancestors, which was very dangerous and threatening. The world we live in today, and I understand bad things happen, and you watching this right now, and you have PTSD, and you're at a traumatic event, things like this do happen. However, they happen far less so today than they have in the past. We have got into a much safer world, and our brains are still geared towards seeing threats around every corner, right? Which is in fact not the reality. And so the threat is not actually around every corner. The threat is in our own minds. The threat is our security guard. That catastrophizing security guard is seeing the worst possible scenario everywhere. Yeah. So again, with reinterpretation, we just start to take back that internal voice, right? Take back the internal voice from the security guard, right? And start to just take a more moderate, a more temperate, a more, quite frankly, realistic view, right, of what's actually going on here, right? And, even letting ourselves know, it's okay, right? It's going to be okay. Even letting yourself know, these are symptoms of PTSD, right? This is my brain that really loves and cares about me, that is on a little bit like, as I say, like a bit of an overprotective mother, right? Who's constantly telling you about the bad things that are going to happen. I understand. I know you care about me, but it's going to be okay, right? So you take back that voice, right? With reinterpretation, we no longer assume that, this voice, this hyperreactive threat detector, is accurate here. See, Ken, we talk about PTSD, but there's actually another phenomenon that psychologists have discovered, and that is PTG. And PTG stands for post-traumatic growth. And post-traumatic growth, which I know you could tell us a great deal about, is actually the growth, development, and even joy that many people will experience sometimes just months after that trauma, right? And this is not just, a kind of sporadic phenomenon. You know that a year after 9/11, talk about a trauma for a city, right? A year after 9/11, New Yorkers were surveyed. Over 80% said that they believe New York was better off because of 9/11, right? They said that people had come together, love or connection. Over 80% said the city is better because of this event. Does it mean the event was good? No. But what it means is that it's possible to derive something good out of anything that happens. And Ken, this brings us, because each one of the strategies has a power question, right? And the question to activate a better interpretation is, what is good about this? Now, I know, okay, anybody who's watching this right now, if you're being raped, assaulted in a car accident, in a disaster, you're probably not thinking, you might be thinking, are you crazy? What do you mean, what is good about this? Right? Now, I'm not saying the event was a good thing, but I'm saying that it is possible to find something good out of anything that happens. And when we do that, we simmer down that catastrophizing voice, and that actually helps us to better deal with it. Alison, somebody I interviewed on a TV show I had a number of years ago, was raped, stabbed, assaulted, left for dead. She was so badly assaulted, her head, she had to support it because so much of her neck had been cut. I mean, it was just vicious assaults. They really did intend to kill her. It's amazing that she survived. Alison told me something I'll never forget on this show. She said to me, Justin, if I could, I would not make that event unhappen. I was like, whoa, how can you say that? She said, so much good has come out of it. She said, I appreciate life so much more because of it. She says, when you come that close to death, you come out of it and life is you just drink it up, right? Because you nearly never had it, right? So this appreciation just in steroids. She said, I become a lot more compassionate because of what's happened to me. She said, I've gone on to help and inspire so many other people. Alison is an inspirational speaker and author, and she said, I've helped so many people. I would never have had that. She said, my life has a new purpose because of this that's happened. So she said, I am so grateful that this has happened. Now, I mean, if Alison can say that about a rape and an assault, it shows you that it's possible for anybody to say this. I can tell you, this question, what is good about it? Jews have asked and answered that question about the Holocaust. About the Holocaust. About 6 million of their own tribe, right, murdered in the Holocaust. They have asked and answered the question, what was good about it? Again, it doesn't mean the Holocaust was a good thing, right? It means that it's possible to derive something positive out of anything that happens, right? The greatest thing that ever happened to David was Goliath, right? This adversity is sent not to get in the way, but it's on the way, right? It is a way that it instructs, it leads, it teaches us, right? And so when you ask yourself what is good about it, you want to think, what can I learn from it? How can this make me a better person, right? How can this make me better instead of bitter, And so what we see with people who tend to shift into post-traumatic growth, and many people who are in PTSD but then go to PTG, some people who never go to PTSD, they just go straight to PTG, right? Is that they have this sense of meaning and purpose. They find reasons why this has happened for themselves. There's a site called Thank God I. Thank God I. I think it's thankgodi.com. And it is stories of people, individuals who literally saying, thank God I got raped. Thank God my story committed suicide. Now, I know anybody who's listening to this might sound brutal to you. Okay, so just before you judge this, check out the site, check out these stories. Somebody says, thank God I get raped, is not saying rape is a good thing. Okay, I'm going to say that again, just in case anybody is misunderstanding me. Okay, I happen to personally find it absolutely heinous, all right? However, I also found, the Holocaust heinous. The point is that these traumas can be extremely powerful in our growth. Now, what determines whether somebody will go to PTG is, yes, this meaning, this purpose that they attribute, and also this optimistic sense, that yes, things might be terrible right now. And by the way, Alison was depressed, okay? I'm not saying you have to go jump straight into PTG, okay? She was depressed for a few months, okay? So it was a long, dark night of the soul for her, right? So you might not be able to get there straight away, but certainly it seems that people who get there, even when they're, when things are pretty tough for them, they are able to see the light. They're able to say, you know what, I might not even feel it now, but it'll be okay, right? That is optimistic sense that things will be okay, right? That as tough as it is right now, as painful as it is right now, I'm going to overcome. I'm going to get through. As Winston Churchill said, when you're going through hell, don't stop, right? So it's not like they're not in suppression and avoidance, right? They're not saying, oh, no, it's all fine, slapping a happy smile over everything. That's not what they're doing. They're saying, yes, this is hectic. They are dealing with this anxiety, right? But their thoughts, that, remember, this is number 2, reinterpretation. The reinterpretation is saying, what can I learn? How can I grow? I'm going to get through this. Things are going to be okay, yeah? And it also seems that people who get into PTG do have social support. So it's very important, try to find people who you love, who you care for, who love you, who care for you, who can support you on this road, right? And that's really going to be a great help, right? So, Ken, just before we move on to our third and final strategy, I just want to share one study that I actually just came across this morning in preparation for our class, and it just was such a bolt of lightning for me. That's a problem with this overthinking, worrying, rumination, and danger. So a landmark study in 1989, based on the earthquake. It was an earthquake in California. A lot of people were killed. Very traumatic. After big disasters like that, you'll see quite a lot of PTSD. Obviously, they didn't know the earthquake was coming. And this is what makes this such incredible research. But they did a study, a major study, on looking at people's thinking styles, whether they were big ruminators or not, right? So we know that some people are just higher in rumination than others, right? So somebody's high in rumination is constantly thinking about negative events, their causes, their consequences, going round and round. So if you do a little bit of this, it's human, right? Everybody does. But if you're very high in rumination, that's what they were looking for, right? Constantly thinking about those negative events. Often it's a resentment of what somebody did or didn't do, what should have done, shouldn't have, what you should have, right? You get into those shouldas. You keep saying, I should, you end up shooting all over yourself, right? So it's that stuck in that overthinking, that rumination. Then the earthquake happens. Here's what they find. If you were high on rumination, right? Just that was your thinking style, you were much more likely to get PTSD. Okay. But here's what's startling. You were more likely to get PTSD if you were high on rumination and the earthquake didn't even directly affect you. So you just happened to live in California, but it didn't affect you. You'd lost no loved ones. You weren't actually there. You weren't injured, right? You would get PTSD. By the way, this is not uncommon, right? So somebody who's not in an assault, not in a terrible event, they land up getting this almost vicarious post-traumatic stress, right? Just by looking at everybody else and seeing what's going on with them, and they go, oh my gosh, right? So high rumination, not personally affected by the earthquake, PTSD. People low on rumination, directly affected by the earthquake, maybe even lost somebody in the earthquake, much less likely to get PTSD, right? That tells you. This is what something I've always said, sometimes people, I think, question this, as I say, like, when it comes to anxiety, traumas, these events, yes, of course they can trigger it. Of course they are part of the picture. They're one of the factors. But actually, a far more significant factor is not the trauma. It's not the event. It's our own operating system. Yeah? And I know because I was there, right? That's how I got an anxiety disorder, okay? So but I just want to remind you, if you have, we just got to reprogram that operating system, right? We got to watch the rumination. We've got to watch the overthinking, right? And settle it down. And I'm going to show you how to do that. So we covered our first two strategies, action, right? So it's about exposure, going back into not necessarily that situation, but similar situations that are actually safe. Two is reinterpretation, right? So we want to watch that overthinking. And if we do find a lot of catastrophizing thinking, we need to challenge it. Often it's helpful to think that you're talking to another person. Like, what would you tell somebody else who had those thoughts, who was talking about all these bad things are going to happen? I'm quite sure you would actually reassure them and tell them, well, actually, that's probably less likely to happen. But reinterpretation can be very helpful for many people. However, it can keep us stuck in thinking, right? So you can kind of get into a debate. Yeah, but what if? No, but it probably won't. Yeah, but what if? But probably won't. And you can actually, it can lead to even more overthinking, right? And if that's what you find, then what you need is transcendence. And transcendence is the third strategy. So we've got action, reinterpretation, transcendence, right? Art of life. So transcendence, let's talk a little bit about thoughts, because again, thoughts are really the culprit here, right? So we can act on our thoughts, yeah? We can reinterpret our thoughts, or with transcendence, we can rise above our thoughts. So somebody with PTSD may have a lot of thoughts, right? About, but what if that happens, or something bad is going to happen, or all men are bad, or I can't get a motor car, right? That thought, you could look at interpreting the thought, but the other thing you can do is say, hey, that's just the product of my overreactive threat detection system. I don't need to believe it. I don't need to act on it. Actually, I can just let it be, right? I can just allow it to be. Realize that I don't think all thoughts. My brain produces thoughts, right? My overreactive threat detection system is producing that thought. Just let it be, like a cloud in the sky. It comes, it goes. Now, if you let it be, you don't follow it, you don't engage with it, you don't dialogue with it, you don't get married to it, right? What will tend to happen is the thought will tend to quieten down on its own, right? So you just allow it to be. You don't try and suppress it, right? Thought suppression doesn't work, right? You try and suppress it, then you've got to monitor to see if you're suppressing it, and in monitoring to see if you suppress it, you bring the thought up again, right? So thought suppression doesn't work. But if you just allow it to be there, and you can create some space between yourself and the thought. Yeah, you create this space, beautiful. You create this space, and you start to, it's just a thought. Yeah, but of course, it's not just a thought, right? So people with intense anxiety, particularly PTSD, it's not just a thought, right? It's a heart palpitation. It's a shortness of breath. It might be numbness, depersonalization. It might be flushing in the cheeks. There's a whole lot of bodily sensations, yeah, going on as well. Well, with transcendence, we treat those in the same way as we treat the thoughts. Because remember, those bodily sensations, which we often feel we have to act on, right? If your heart starts increasing, shortness of breath, there's a sense, I need to do something. I need to fight. I need to fly. But of course, you're out the assault. You're out the car accident. There's nothing to do here, right? Right? So you need to just allow those sensations to be, just like you allow the thoughts to be. And if you just allow them to be and you just sit with them, right? You don't react. You just allow them to be. Again, space starts to open up where you can actually see the sensations. And what I often do is I say to people, close your eyes, right? So if you can, just close your eyes and actually, if you feel that the heart palpitation, just imagine you're looking at your chest from outside your body and just see it for what it is, right? Just don't even try and change it. And if you do that, you'll start to notice it'll start to change on its own. But you don't even try. You just let it do its thing. Over time, invariably, it'll start to settle down. And it's really liberating because you realize, oh gosh, these feelings that feel so out of control, right? That I can't do it, and they're going, and I got it, and I got it, and I got it. And actually, if I got to do nothing. And if I actually just let them be, they dissolve on their own, right? They actually just dissolve on their own. And in effect, what's happening here is a kind of internal exposure. So when we think of PTSD, we think of an external trauma, right? But that trauma is over. The trauma is actually now on the inside, isn't it? The trauma is our thoughts of these bad things. The trauma is all the sensations. Now, if I sit with those thoughts and I sit with those sensations, right? A little bit like exposing myself going back to a car, right? That I had an accident in, and I sit in the car. Over time, my brain learns, nothing bad's going to happen, right? If I sit with the sensation and I just sit with it without drinking alcohol, without taking a benzodiazepine, without trying to numb it or stop it, without trying to suppress it, without trying to run from it, distracting myself even, without even distracting myself, I just sit with it. What happens? My brain goes, oh, it's just a sensation. It's just a thought. Yeah. And because I'm not resisting it, right? The opposite of exposure is avoidance, resistance, avoidance, resistance. Because I'm not resisting it and I'm sitting with it, my brain learns this is not actually a real threat. There's no real danger here. It's okay. Yeah. And it then starts to quieten down on its own. Can the same applies to images, right? So I know when I talk thoughts, I talk about the voice in the head, or people with PTSD, of its images. It's image of the rape. It's image of the assault. It's the guy's face, right? As he was staring at you when this thing happened, yeah? I still have images of, the domestic violence that I experienced as a kid in our family, or my sexual abuser. But the truth is, that sexual abuser, my father, who was, smacking us, and seeing him smack my mother. I mean, that is but by allowing those images in my mind. See, what do we want to do? We want to go, no, that was so painful. To see my father hit my mother, to see him run after her with a gun. I mean, I have that. It's pretty clear in my mind. But what I used to do was run from that image, right? I didn't even want to think about that. No, when that comes in my head, I need to stop thinking about that, because that's horrible. That's horrible. To distract yourself, do something else, do a meditation. Yeah, that's what I thought, right? Now I'll do a meditation, I'll relax, meditate, deep breathe, meditate. This is where, and I love meditation, and I love deep breathing, and I love relaxation, but this is where it is like a drug. If you're using it to stop those thoughts. If you're going into meditation to stop the thought of that assault, you're trying to suppress it. You're telling your brain that thought is bad, evil, it can hurt you. Your brain builds anxiety to it, right? And this is what I was doing for so long, right? Push the thoughts away, meditate, go into a spiritual nirvana. So fucking misguided, and it makes me so angry, because for so many years, that's what I thought was the solution, right? And I never understood why I could then get into that state, but afterwards be beset by this anxiety and thoughts and think that my brain was broken. No, I was just using a stupid, dumbass strategy. And forgive me if I'm getting a little heated about this, because I just feel like I wasted so much, time with the strategy, not wasted so much time that it caused me this unnecessary suffering, right? But I got PTG, so I see the opportunity, the growth, the fact that I'm able to be here today. So what I'm saying is that what we actually have to do is sit with that image of the assault. Sit with the image of my father and that gun and my mother. Stay with the image, right? Which, by the way, now I'm not saying that it doesn't get my heart up a little, but I've got that image of that sexual abuser. I got it right here. It's in my mind. I can see exactly what he did. It's okay. It's okay, right? It's okay. I don't need to run from it. And it's such a liberation to realize you don't have to run from your own thoughts. Because the problem is, if you're running from your own thoughts, how do you get out of your head? How do you get out of your head? This for me was a problem with my own intrusive thoughts, is that it's the ultimate torture, because you can't get away from it, really. I mean, you can try, but just try to escape inside your own head, right? It has a way of getting in, right? Whether you try, right? But when you say, fine, let it be, let it be. There's the image. There's the image of the sexual abuse. Boom. There's the image of the violence. Boom. There it is. Now, initially, I understand that can be very frightening. Okay, I get it. That's why we, again, do this in a graduated approach, right? In the Transcender method, right? We take you through this step by step. But over time, when you can get to the point where, see, this is the thing. People think the cure PTSD is not having the images, not having the intrusive thoughts, not having the sensations. That's not the cure. The cure is having the images, having the thoughts, having the sensations, but they don't ultimately have the same effect, right? That's actually what it's about. It's about being able to tolerate, right? Being able to tolerate them, right? So that is our third strategy. So the third strategy is transcendence. It's allow. It's accept. Now, understand, if somebody is in the middle of a trauma and that you're in a trauma and somebody's physically abusing you, you don't allow that. You resist, right? But remember, we're not talking about the real trauma. We're talking about the perceived trauma. And that's what's so, we're going to get our head around. The physical world demands often that you resist. Fight or flight, absolutely, damn it, yes. If you're in a relationship, you've got to find a way to get out. Yeah, if there's abuse going on. But when it's happening in your own head, then it flips. Then we flip the script here. Then it's no longer resist, because there is nothing out there to fight or flight. Then it's accept. It's allow. It's let it be, right? You know, you can't run away from your shadow, right? As hard as you try, you can't run away, right? And actually, when you just sit down under a tree, the shadow actually tends to go away on its own, right? And that's really what we're doing here. We're just sitting, we're allowing. And in allow, our mind starts to release itself from that perceived threat, and ultimately we transcend.
Yes, I think the way you break down the strategies into doable, like, and I know it seems every time I say doing, you know, this exercise, it seems as though it's an action step, but what you're saying is allowing, sitting with it, allowing your body to be with that moment, and also doing it gradually and showing yourself self-compassion as you do it, right? Because I think something you always highlight is when you're going into this method of, you know, because it's different from what we taught. We taught that, you know, you need to go back to childhood trauma and relive it and relive it and relive it. But this is saying, you know, allow yourself to get into the state. And even if you have to do it gradually, don't lash yourself when you find yourself, you know, running away with your thought or feeling like, oh no, I'm not allowing this now. Show yourself self-compassion. Right?
Yes, absolutely.
It's a part of this because it's different. Doing nothing is it is more difficult than doing nothing.
Absolutely can. And so you might find yourself, exactly as you say, you know, resisting. You don't want to beat yourself up for resisting. Oh gosh, you know, no. I'm so frustrated that I'm not accepting. You know, accepting that you're not accepting. In that moment, I didn't accept, right? So radical acceptance is actually the acceptance of non-acceptance, right? And so what that means is that in that moment that I feel that resistance, that non-acceptance, I go, okay, I know that, you know, this is, I know that ultimately I need to accept. Right now I'm not, and that's okay. And as you say, compassion. You know, I know this is tough for me. Be kind to yourself. Be caring to yourself. Understand that this takes time. A lot of people with PTSD, you know, the Buddhists, I love this distinction. They say pain is inevitable. Suffering is optional. And so much PTSD, you know, is people going, why am I experiencing this? You know, these images, these thoughts, right? I want to emphasize again, I've been talking about a lot about thoughts and sensations. PTSD, it's often images, right? Images that, you know, and by the images can be thought, responded to in the same way as thoughts, right? So there's a thought, there's an image, okay? There it is, yeah. Thought, image, sensation, right? And it's just what I call splitting the emotion, right? And we split the emotion where we just become aware. There's the thought, there's an image, there's the sensation. So yes, Can, very important. Be kind to yourself, be caring. Understand if you do PTSD, your brain has, you know, really learned to fear in this way, right? It's learned this anxiety. It takes time to unlearn it, right? So be kind to yourself, be compassionate, be patient with yourself. It's like going for a workout at the gym, right? You don't get the muscles you want overnight, right? It's going to take a bit of time. So you want to give yourself that time because you will get through this. You absolutely will. You know, and the truth is, you're going to get to something even better, post-traumatic growth, because you're going to come out with wisdom. You're going to come out with humility. You're going to come out with insight and understanding that you didn't have before, right? So I know, you know, this right now might not feel that way, but your wound is your superpower. You know, wound is your superpower. And I truly believe that anyone can say like I do, you know, this was the best thing that ever happened to me. This was the best thing that ever happened to me. I could not give, I could not serve in the way that I do without this happening to me. And I know that everybody can say the same. Maybe not now, but take the path. Take the path. It's a path of courage. It's a path of courage. It's going through the thick and the thin. But as the great Italian American philosopher Rocky Balboa said, it's not how hard you can hit, it's how hard you can get hit and keep moving forward. And that's what this is about, right? It's about just moving forward, step at a time, through exposure, through reinterpretation, and ultimately through allowing these thoughts, these images, these sensations.
Oh, Jess, thank you for giving us that powerful statement. Your wound is your superpower. And I think that's where we can leave this masterclass on today. Take care.
Thank you, Cand.